Mr. Mistry, just to interrupt you, I want to get a quick comment from Adi Godrej as well, who's joining in live from New Delhi. Mr. Godrej, how do you read the vote on account? Do you think the numbers that he's put out look credible? 4.6% for FY14 as far as the fiscal deficit is concerned. And of course, your reactions to the tweaking as far as on the indirect taxes front, plenty of them. Does it come as a surprise?
Well, certainly the numbers are credible. He has stuck to the 4.8% for this financial year successfully. He did it for the last year too, and I think it's certainly credible at 4.6%. As far as the excise duty reductions are concerned, they are important. I think these are industries that have suffered very considerably. Obviously, because it was not a full budget, he couldn't do it for many other industries. But clearly this is welcome, and I think it will help the situation. And hopefully when the final budget is announced in July, we see some more of this excise reduction because the economy badly needs a leg up.
Mr. Godrej, Mr. Mistry, gentlemen would urge you to stay with us. I'm just going to get a closing comment from Ramdev Agrawal. Ramdev, do you think Indian markets now have a firm base in place looking at what has come out from today's vote on account, what is happening to earnings and the way how emerging market currencies have stabilized? Do you think the trajectory now is headed higher?
Yeah, I think aggregate market broad numbers clearly have a solid base now with the kind of conclusion of this particular round of earnings call we have seen, and with the inflation broadly under control and currency very stable, and even in vote on account, if you see the speech, his commitment was very, very strong that we got to have a very controlled fiscal discipline kind of situation and controlled inflation. With that, my sense is that we have a very reasonable valuation and a very promising election going ahead. I would be surprised. The downside, I mean, upside could be anything, but downside is very, very limited from here.
You spoke about how difficult it was for the finance minister to actually keep his numbers in check. But given the fact that your tax revenues are already declining, was this the time to really announce some more giveaways by way of excise tax concessions? Because after all, one of the main reasons why we are in the predicament that we are is because fiscal stimulus was way beyond what was warranted. So is this the time to give more concessions? Mr. Mistry? That question was addressed to you, sir.
Well, my guess is that if he had to give some concessions to revive the economy. Now, auto is one of the sectors which has been beaten down so much in recent times that giving some incentive for the auto sector by itself, I don't know what the financial number was, I don't know what the amount rupee implication is, but giving some incentive which improves sentiment and pushes more of manufacturing, I think it's not a bad thing, so long as he has measures in place to ensure that the fiscal deficit for next year is kept in at 4.1%.
Mr. Godrej, I have a question for you. Yes. The finance minister has cut excise duties on capital goods and on consumer durables. Now, I can understand that if you cut the taxes on consumer durables, maybe the demand for it increases. But tell me, cutting excise duty on capital goods, will that really increase the demand for capital goods? I mean, surely the key constraint is the question of what is the state of economy and what the investment climate is, rather than what is the amount of tax on capital goods. So I wonder whether that particular thing, in your view, will have any impact. The second thing I'd like to ask is that in your industry, I mean, FMCG has been doing pretty well. How do we account for the fact that overall capital goods output this whole year has been completely flat? If a certain number of industries have been doing quite well, are you people investing? And if you are, why is it not showing up in the capital goods output?
Well, the capital goods excise reduction I don't think will have any impact on collections, because as you know, capital good excise duty is mod vatable. So I don't think it will have much of an effect in my view. So it's neither here nor there. The reduction in excise duty on consumer durables, autos, etc. will certainly be helpful. As to your other question, there is a slowdown in the FMCG sector too. Demand is lower in the last 6 months than it was earlier, and of course capital investment continues by the FMCG industry in a strong way. It's not a very capital intensive industry, and clearly to meet the demand we certainly keep investing.
Jahangir, one last question to you before we let you go. one of the 10 points that the finance minister outlined, he said the RBI must accept a certain moderate amount of inflation and it is inevitable in the process of growth. Does it mean that he's not quite happy with the Urjit Patel recommendations and the RBI is going to have a tough battle on hand to really get it accepted by the government?
Look, this is a perennial battle between the Ministry of Finance and RBI, and I think it's true for almost all other emerging market countries too. And I think this will persist. I think the concern obviously is that if the RBI moves completely to an inflation target and focuses completely on inflation target, then there could be occasions in which that dominates its short-term growth concerns. So my guess is that that's where the concern comes from. But at the end of the day, I think the finance minister knows full well that in the absence of bringing down structural inflation to what used to be the case back in 2003, 2008, so you're talking about an inflation rate of 4 to 5%, it is very, very difficult to get any kind of sustained momentum and growth going. You could get such growth momentum going briefly, as we did in 2009 and 10, as we talked about, through fiscal spending. But that's always short-lived and always ends up in tears, as we've seen over the last couple of years. So my guess is that they will have to come to some sort of resolution that at least over the medium term, inflation has to be brought down to 4 to 5%.
Right, Jahangir, I know we've extended our appointment with you, so really appreciate your time and thank you for being with us for such an extended time. Nilesh, good afternoon to you. This question is coming your way. Nilesh, how will life change for Indian markets? A non-event has become a minor event and still there is no reaction on benchmark indices.
Yeah, clearly I think that this was widely expected to be a non-event, and of course the excise duty cuts has brought some kind of life, particularly in sectors like the auto kind of sector. But I think clearly the market's mind is focused on that is the fiscal deficit number of 4.1%. How credible or realistic is that assessment? And I think clearly out there that's where the market's concerns lie, that on one hand we have excise duty cuts, on the other hand we are going to have higher subsidies and a higher government borrowing. So in that kind of a backdrop, how achievable is the 4.1% fiscal deficit number? And this is surely going to put some kind of pressure on the government's borrowing programs, and therefore is going to put an upward pressure on interest rates, which I think at this stage market, I'm not too sure, is very comfortable with that kind of a scenario. So I think that's why you have a pretty muted response from the market in response to the finance minister's decision to cut excise duty.
Muted response to the market from the market is not without a reason, says Nilesh. Mr. Godrej, I know you're in a rush. One quick question: do you think, in a sense, Swami made the point that the finance minister has used this budget to reach out to corporate India in terms of a few SOPs that we've seen on the indirect tax front. Do you think there's anything in it for the investment cycle to turn around, or do you think India Inc. is going to wait for the election outcome before it starts investing?
Well, I think in certain cases, since the excise duty has been cut, there will be immediate demand, because it's not sure whether the excise duty cuts will continue over a period of time. So there will be immediate demand, which is of course welcome. But really, if you look at the investment cycle, I think people will wait for the results of the election.
Mr. Godrej, thank you so much for being with us. But a quick question now to you, Mr. Mistry. You had spoken about government having to do something about as far as infrastructure is concerned. Now we've tried everything. We've tried government spending. We've tried PPPs. Now what really is the answer?